The rain was coming down so hard that the windshield wipers could barely keep up. Sophie squinted through the darkness, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she drove down the empty highway. It was almost 11 at night, and all she wanted was to get home, take off her shoes, and collapse into bed. She had just finished another long day, working at the diner from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then rushing to her second job at the bookstore until closing time. This was her life now. 2 jobs, 7 days a week with barely any time to breathe. But she didn't complain. The money she earned wasn't just for her. Half of it went to her younger brother's college tuition. He was studying engineering, and someone had to help him achieve his dreams. Sophie's father had passed away 3 years ago. He was a mechanic who owned a small garage. Growing up, she spent every weekend with him, learning everything about cars. He taught her how to change oil, fix engines, and yes, how to change a tire. "You never know when you'll need these skills," he used to say. She missed him every single day. As she drove through the rain, something caught her eye. Through the heavy downpour, she saw hazard lights blinking on the side of the road. A car was stopped there, and she could make out the shape of someone standing beside it. Sophie's first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, she was tired, and stopping for strangers in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly the safest thing to do. But something made her slow down. Maybe it was her father's voice in her head, always telling her to help people when she could. Maybe it was just her nature. Whatever it was, she found herself pulling over about 20 feet ahead of the stranded car. Sophie grabbed her old jacket from the passenger seat and pulled it on. The rain immediately soaked through as she stepped out. She walked toward the other car, and that's when she got a better look at the person who needed help. It was a man, probably in his early 30s. He was wearing what looked like an expensive suit, now completely drenched and clinging to him. His dress shoes were covered in mud, and he had this look on his face that was somewhere between frustrated and completely lost. The car beside him was sleek and black, the kind that probably cost more than Sophie made in 2 years. "Hey, are you okay?" Sophie called out over the sound of the rain. The man looked up, clearly surprised to see someone stopping. "Oh, thank God, yes, I have a flat tire and I have absolutely no idea what to do about it." Sophie couldn't help but smile a little. At least he was honest. She walked closer and looked at the tire. It was completely flat, probably hit a pothole or ran over something sharp. "Do you have a spare?" she asked. "I think so. Maybe in the trunk?" The man ran his hand through his wet hair, looking embarrassed. "I've never actually had to deal with this before." "All right, pop the trunk. Let me see what you've got." The man pressed something on his key fob and the trunk opened smoothly. Sophie peered inside and found the spare tire, along with a jack and a tire iron that looked like they'd never been used. Perfect, everything she needed was there. "I'm David. By the way," the man said as she pulled out the equipment. "Sophie." "Nice to meet you, David. Now how about you hold this flashlight for me from your phone while I get this done?" David looked stunned. "Wait, you're going to change it?" "I was about to call a tow truck. That'll take forever out here, especially in this weather. I can have this done in 20 minutes, maybe less." Sophie was already positioning the jack under the car's frame. Besides, it's really not that complicated once you know what you're doing. She worked quickly and efficiently, her father's training kicking in automatically. David held his phone's flashlight, trying his best to angle it so she could see what she was doing. As Sophie loosened the lug nuts, David started making conversation. "So, do you usually stop to help random strangers on dark highways?" "Not usually," Sophie admitted, grunting as she pulled off the flat tire. "But you looked pretty desperate out here. Plus, my dad was a mechanic. He taught me that if you can help someone, you should. That's really kind of you. Most people would have just driven past." "Yeah, well, I hope someone would stop for me if I was stuck out here." Sophie lifted the spare tire into place and started threading the lug nuts back on. "So what happened? How'd you end up out here without knowing how to change a tire?" David laughed, but it sounded a bit self-deprecating. "Honestly, I've always had people to handle stuff like this for me. I just realized how useless that makes me in situations like this." "You're not useless. You just never learned. There's a difference." Sophie tightened the nuts in a star pattern, making sure everything was secure. "Everyone has different skills. I bet there are things you know how to do that I'd be completely lost at. Maybe. But right now, standing in the rain watching you fix my car, I'm feeling pretty inadequate." Sophie lowered the jack and stood up, brushing her wet hair out of her face. Well, you're all set now. The spare should get you wherever you need to go. But make sure you get a proper tire as soon as you can. These temporary spares aren't meant for long distances or high speeds. I will. Thank you so much. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done without you. David reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Please, let me pay you for your time and trouble. Sophie held up her hand. No, I don't want your money, really. I'm just glad I could help. Are you sure? I mean, you got completely soaked helping me. I was already soaked from walking to my car earlier. It's fine, honestly. Sophie started putting the flat tire and the jack back in his trunk. Anyone would have done the same thing. David shook his head, smiling slightly. I don't think that's true, but I really appreciate it. Can I at least get your number or something? I'd like to properly thank you somehow. Sophie hesitated. She didn't usually give her number to strangers, but there was something genuine about David. He seemed like a decent person who just happened to be out of his element. Sure, I guess. She walked to her car and grabbed an old napkin from her glove compartment. Using a pen she kept in there, she scribbled down her number and handed it to him. There you go. Thank you, Sophie. Really, you're a lifesaver. Just pay it forward sometime. Help someone else when they need it. Sophie smiled and started walking back to her car. As she drove away, watching David's car disappear in her rearview mirror, Sophie thought about how strange the encounter had been. She wondered briefly who David was, why he was out here in the middle of nowhere in a fancy suit, but then she shrugged it off. It didn't really matter. She'd helped someone who needed it, and that was enough. Her apartment was still 20 minutes away, and tomorrow she had to be back at the diner by 6. Sophie turned up the radio a little and focused on the road ahead. She had no idea that the man she'd just helped was one of the wealthiest people in the state, or that their chance meeting in the rain would completely change the direction of her life. For now, she was just a tired woman driving home after a long day, completely unaware that fate had just knocked on her door. 3 days had passed since the rainy night on the highway, and Sophie had almost forgotten about the whole thing. Almost. She was wiping down tables at the diner during the afternoon lull when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Unknown number. She usually didn't answer those, but something made her pick up this time. Hello? Hi, is this Sophie? The tire-changing hero from the other night? She recognized the voice immediately. David. Oh, hey. Yeah, this is Sophie. How's the car? Running perfectly, thanks to you. Listen, I know this might seem forward, but I'd really like to take you to dinner, as a proper thank you for saving me from spending the night on that highway. Sophie wiped her hands on her apron, glancing around the empty diner. Part of her wanted to say no. She barely knew this guy. But another part of her, the part that had noticed his kind eyes and genuine smile even in the pouring rain, was curious. I don't know. You really don't have to do that. I want to. Please, just dinner. Nothing fancy, I promise. You picked the place. That's what sold her. The fact that he was letting her choose. Okay, fine. But I'm picking somewhere in my neighborhood and I'm talking burgers and fries, not some fancy restaurant. Sounds perfect. Just text me the address and when you're free. 2 nights later, Sophie found herself sitting in a booth at her favorite local burger joint, watching the door and feeling slightly nervous. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a simple sweater. Nothing special. When David walked in, she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the fancy suit. He was wearing jeans and a casual sweater too, and he looked so much more relaxed than he had on the highway. Hey, he said, sliding into the booth across from her with a smile. Thanks for agreeing to this. Thanks for not picking some place where I'd need to Google which fork to use, Sophie joked. David laughed. Trust me, this is much more my speed. I can't remember the last time I just went out for a regular burger. They ordered and the conversation started flowing easier than Sophie expected. David asked her about her work, and she found herself telling him about the diner, about her regulars who came in every morning for coffee, about the bookstore and how she loved recommending books to customers even though it didn't pay much. 2 jobs must be exhausting, David said, his expression sympathetic. It is, but it's necessary. My brother's in college studying engineering. My dad passed away a few years ago, and my mom works as a nurse, but it's still not quite enough to cover everything, so I help out where I can. Sophie took a bite of her burger. What about you? You said you work in technology? Yeah, I do. David seemed to choose his words carefully. I work with tech companies, helping them develop and grow. It's interesting work, but honestly, it can be pretty isolating sometimes. What do you mean? I don't know. I guess I spend so much time working that I forget what it's like to just have normal conversations with people. Everyone's always so focused on business, on deals, on what you can do for them. It gets tiring, Sophie nodded. She understood that feeling in a different way. I get that. Sometimes at the diner I feel like I'm just going through the motions, you know? Smile, take orders, refill coffee, repeat. It's like I'm waiting for my real life to start. What would your real life look like? David asked, leaning forward slightly. Sophie hadn't expected that question, but she found herself answering honestly.
I want to open my own little cafe someday.
Nothing huge or fancy. Just a cozy place where people feel welcome, where the coffee's good and the atmosphere is warm. I've been saving up for years, but it's slow going. That sounds amazing. Have you thought about what you'd call it? They spent the next hour talking about her cafe dreams. David asked thoughtful questions about her business ideas, about what kind of food she'd serve, what the space would look like. He seemed genuinely interested, not just being polite. Sophie found herself sharing details she'd never told anyone, plans she'd been too embarrassed to say out loud. When David talked about his work, he was vague about specifics, but he opened up about other things. He told her about feeling trapped by expectations, about how sometimes he felt like he was living someone else's life. He talked about losing his sense of purpose somewhere along the way. That's heavy stuff for a first dinner, David said with a self-conscious laugh. Sorry, I don't usually unload on people like this. Don't apologize. It's nice to have a real conversation for once. Most of my interactions are either taking food orders or dealing with my coworker, complaining about her ex-boyfriend for the millionth time. Well, I promise not to complain about any ex-girlfriends tonight. Appreciate that, Sophie grinned. Though now I'm curious, not much to tell. Dated someone for a while, but we wanted different things. She's doing fine, I'm doing fine, end of story. The check came and David grabbed it before Sophie could even reach for her purse. This was supposed to be a thank you dinner, remember? Fine, but next time I'm paying. Next time. David's eyes lit up. Sophie felt her cheeks warm. I mean, if there is a next time. If you want. I definitely want. They started meeting regularly after that. Once a week turned into twice a week. Coffee on Wednesday mornings before Sophie's shift. Dinner on Saturday nights. They went bowling where Sophie destroyed David at every game. They spent an afternoon at the public library, where Sophie showed him her favorite hidden reading nook. They took walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. David never mentioned anything about wealth or status. He paid for things sometimes, but never in a flashy way. When Sophie insisted on splitting costs, he didn't argue. He seemed genuinely happy just to be spending time with her, and she felt the same way about him. One Saturday, Sophie invited him to her brother's soccer game at the community college. David showed up in jeans and a college sweatshirt, fitting right in with the other families in the bleachers. He cheered when her brother scored, bought them all hot dogs at halftime, and listened patiently as her brother explained the finer points of defensive strategy. Your brother's great, David said as they walked to the parking lot afterward. You must be really proud of him. I am. He's worked so hard to get where he is. Full scholarship, dean's list, the whole thing. Sophie smiled. My dad would have loved seeing this. David was quiet for a moment. He'd be proud of you too, you know. For taking care of your family, for working toward your dreams, for being the kind of person who stops to help strangers in the rain. Sophie looked at him, really looked at him and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just friendship anymore. Somewhere between the burgers and the bowling and the easy conversations, she'd developed real feelings for David. The thought scared her a little. Thanks, she said softly. That means a lot. As David drove away that night, Sophie stood in the parking lot and watched his car disappear. She pulled out her phone and called her best friend from the diner. I think I'm in trouble, Sophie said when her friend answered. What kind of trouble? The falling for someone kind of trouble. Her friend laughed. About time. Tell me everything, Sophie did. She talked about how easy David was to be around, how he actually listened when she talked, how he seemed interested in her life and her dreams, how he made her laugh, how he never made her feel small or less than because of where she worked or how much money she made. He sounds perfect, her friend said. So what's the problem? I don't know. Maybe it's too good to be true. Like, what if he's secretly married or something? Has he given you any reason to think that? No, Sophie admitted. He's been nothing but honest and kind. Then stop overthinking it and just enjoy it. Sophie wanted to do exactly that. She had no idea that the man she was falling for was hiding something big, not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he'd found something real for the first time in years and he was terrified of losing it. David Thornton, billionaire CEO, had finally found someone who saw him as just David, and he didn't know how to tell her the truth without everything falling apart. Sophie was having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She'd just finished her shift at the diner and stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few things. Standing in the checkout line, she mindlessly scanned the magazine rack while waiting her turn. That's when her world tilted sideways. There, on the cover of a major business magazine, was David's face. But it wasn't just any picture. He was in a sharp suit, standing in front of a glass building with his arms crossed, looking every bit the powerful businessman. The headline read, "Tech Billionaire David Thornton, How He Built a $10 billion Empire Before 40. Sophie's hands started shaking. She grabbed the magazine and stared at it, her heart pounding. Billionaire? $10 billion? This had to be a mistake. This couldn't be her David, the guy who wore regular jeans and got excited about hot dogs at soccer games. But it was him. Same eyes, same smile, same face, just a completely different version than the one she knew. She bought the magazine with trembling hands and sat in her car in the parking lot, reading every single word. David Thornton, CEO of Thornton Industries, one of the youngest billionaires in the country, recently ended engagement to some socialite named Victoria something, known for his business genius and his intensely private personal life. Sophie felt sick. For 2 months, she'd been spending time with this man, sharing her dreams and struggles, talking about her 2 jobs and her tiny apartment and her savings for a cafe that would probably take 10 more years to afford. And the whole time he could buy 1,000 cafes without even noticing the money was gone. She felt like an idiot. Like some kind of charity case he'd picked up on the side of the road. Was this entertaining for him? Was he going back to his mansion and laughing about the poor girl who worked at a diner and thought they were actually equals? When her phone rang that evening with David's name on the screen, she almost didn't answer. But anger won over hurt. "Hey, Sophie, I was thinking we could... When were you going to tell me?" Her voice came out cold and sharp, silence on the other end. Then quietly, "Tell you what. Don't play dumb, David, or should I call you Mr. Thornton? The billionaire tech genius?" Sophie's voice cracked. "I saw the magazine. I know everything." She heard him take a sharp breath. "Sophie, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been lying to me for 2 months? That you let me tell you about my pathetic little life while you were probably slumming it for fun? It's not like that. Please, can I come over? I can't do this over the phone." "Fine, you know where I live. My tiny apartment that probably costs less than your car payment." She hung up before he could respond. David showed up at her door 20 minutes later, looking panicked and disheveled in a way she'd never seen him. Sophie let him in but stood with her arms crossed, not offering him a seat. "Talk," she said. "I never lied to you," David started. "I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing, David. You let me believe you were just some regular guy who worked in tech. You watched me stress about money, about paying for my brother's school, about saving pennies for my cafe dream, and you said nothing. Because I didn't want you to look at me differently." His voice was desperate. "Do you have any idea what it's like? Everyone who knows who I am wants something. They see dollar signs, opportunities, connections. Nobody just sees me. So you thought you'd just keep me in the dark forever? What was the plan here, David?" "I don't know. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that when I was with you, I felt like myself for the first time in years. You treated me like a normal person. You laughed at my jokes because they were funny, not because I'm rich. You called me out when I said something stupid. You were real with me." Sophie felt tears burning in her eyes. "And you think I would have treated you differently if I'd known? Wouldn't you have?" She wanted to say no immediately, but she stopped. Would she have? Would she have felt comfortable sharing her struggles if she'd known he was a billionaire? Would she have suggested burger joints and bowling alleys? Would she have let him meet her brother, see her apartment, know about her 2 jobs? "I don't know," she admitted, and that honesty hurt. "But you should have given me the chance to decide that for myself. You took away my choice." David ran his hand through his hair, looking lost. "You're right. I should have told you. I was selfish. Sophie, these past 2 months have been the best I've had in years. Maybe ever. Being with you, talking to you, it made me remember who I used to be before all the money and the company and the expectations. So what am I to you? Some kind of project? A way to feel normal? No. God, no. David stepped closer, his eyes intense. You're the person I think about first thing when I wake up. You're the one I want to tell when something good happens. You make me laugh, you challenge me, you make me want to be better. Sophie, I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Sophie felt like she couldn't breathe. You can't just say that now, she whispered. You can't drop that after everything. I know the timing is terrible, but it's true. I've been in love with you for weeks. I was terrified to tell you because of this, because of the money and the company and everything that comes with it. I was afraid I'd lose you, and you thought lying was better? I didn't lie. I omitted things. And yes, that was wrong. I see that now. David's voice cracked. But my feelings for you are the most honest thing in my life right now. Sophie wiped at her eyes angrily. I need you to leave. I need to think. Sophie, please, just go, David, please. He looked like she'd physically hurt him, but he nodded and walked to the door. He paused there, turning back. For what it's worth, nothing about us was fake for me. You're not a project or a charity case or entertainment. You're the most real thing that's happened to me in years, and I'm sorry I messed it up. After he left, Sophie collapsed on her couch and cried. She cried because she was angry and hurt and confused, but mostly she cried because despite everything, despite the lies and the omissions and the massive gap between their worlds, she realized she was in love with him too. She called her friend from the diner, who came over with ice cream and listened to everything. So what are you going to do? Her friend asked. I don't know. How can this even work? He's a billionaire. I work 2 jobs just to get by. We're from completely different worlds. But you love him. That's not enough, though, is it? Love doesn't fix the fact that he wasn't honest with me, and it doesn't fix the fact that I'll always wonder if I'm good enough for his world. Sophie, listen to me. That man drove across town in the middle of the night because you were upset. He looked absolutely wrecked. That's not someone who's playing games. But how do I trust him again? That's the question, isn't it? Sophie spent the next week avoiding David's calls and texts. She went to work, came home, and tried to figure out what she was feeling. She missed him terribly, missed their conversations, his laugh, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. But every time she thought about calling him back, she remembered the magazine cover. She thought about his world of mansions and private jets and society events. Where would she fit in all of that? Would she always be the girl from the diner who got lucky? On the 7th day, David sent a text that simply said, I understand if you don't want to see me again, but I need you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You changed my life, Sophie. Thank you for that. Sophie stared at that message for a long time. Then she looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd built for herself. She thought about her father and what he would say. He'd always told her that character mattered more than circumstances, that who someone was mattered more than what they had. And David, despite the money and the lies of omission, had shown her genuine kindness. He'd listened to her dreams like they mattered. He'd shown up for her brother's game. He'd been vulnerable with her about his own struggles. Maybe the question wasn't whether their worlds were too different. Maybe the question was whether what they had was worth fighting for. Sophie picked up her phone and typed, We need to talk. Really talk this time. No more secrets. His response came immediately. Anything. Everything. I promise. They met at the same park where they'd had their first picnic, back when Sophie thought David was just a regular guy with a tech job. It was late afternoon, and the sun was starting to set, casting everything in a golden light. Sophie got there first and sat on their usual bench, her heart racing. When David arrived, he looked nervous. Not the confident businessman from the magazine cover, but the guy she'd gotten to know over burgers and bowling. He sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, he said quietly. I needed time to think, Sophie replied, looking straight ahead. And I realized something. I was angry not just because you didn't tell me about the money. I was angry because I felt stupid. Like I'd been sharing my whole life with you while you were holding back this massive part of yours. I know. And I'm sorry. You deserved honesty from the beginning. Sophie turned to look at him. So let's start over. Right now. Complete honesty. I want to know everything. And I mean everything. For the next hour, David told her the truth. About building his company from scratch in his 20s, about the pressure and the isolation that came with success, about his engagement to Victoria that had been more about expectations than love. He told her about board meetings and business deals, but also about the loneliness of never knowing if people liked him or his money. When I met you that night, David said, you had no idea who I was. You helped me because that's who you are. And when we started spending time together, you treated me like I was just me. Do you know how rare that is in my world? But I wasn't treating the real you. I was treating the version you decided to show me. That was the real me, Sophie. The suits and the boardrooms and the fancy events, that's the costume I wear. The guy who laughs at your jokes and loses at bowling and gets excited about your brother's soccer games, that's who I actually am underneath everything else. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Okay, my turn to be completely honest. When I found out who you were, part of why I was so upset was because I felt like I wasn't good enough. Like you were this incredible, successful person and I'm just a waitress trying to scrape together enough money to maybe open a cafe someday. I felt embarrassed. Sophie, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. Let me finish, she said gently. I felt embarrassed, but then I got angry at myself for feeling that way. Because I work hard. I take care of my family. I have dreams and I'm working toward them. Even if it's slow. That's worth something, isn't it? It's worth everything, David said intensely. You're one of the strongest people I know. You don't need billions of dollars to prove your worth. I know that now. But if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to make this work, I need to know that you know that too. I need to know that you see me as an equal, not as some project or someone you need to rescue. You're not a project. You never were. You're the person who rescued me, remember? David smiled slightly. On that highway, and in every conversation we've had since, Sophie felt something loosen in her chest. So where do we go from here? Wherever you want. But I'd like to do it together, if you'll give me another chance. A real chance, with complete honesty this time. I want to meet your sister, Sophie said suddenly. You talk about her all the time. If we're going to do this, I need to meet the people in your real life. Done. She's been asking about you anyway. And I want you to understand something. I'm not going to change who I am. I'm still going to work at the diner. I'm still going to live in my apartment and save my money and work toward my goals my own way. I wouldn't want you to change. That's not what this is about. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both processing everything. Then Sophie reached over and took his hand. I was miserable this past week without you. David squeezed her hand. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My assistant asked if I was sick. I'm still scared, Sophie admitted, about what it means to be with someone from such a different world, about whether I can handle all the stuff that comes with who you are. I'm scared too. Scared I'll mess this up again. Scared you'll wake up one day and realize you're better off without all the complications that come with me. Sophie turned to face him fully. Then I guess we'll just have to figure it out together. David pulled her into a hug and Sophie let herself relax into it. It felt right, being in his arms, like coming home after a long journey. Over the next few weeks, they started building something new. Something based on honesty this time. David introduced Sophie to his sister Catherine over brunch. Sophie had been nervous, expecting some snobby socialite, but Catherine turned out to be warm and down to earth. Oh, thank God, Catherine said when she met Sophie, someone normal. Do you know how long I've been waiting for my brother to date someone who isn't obsessed with social climbing? Your brother mentioned you were blunt, Sophie laughed. He needs someone who'll keep him grounded. That tech world will eat you alive if you let it. Catherine leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, he's been different since he met you. Lighter somehow. Don't let him mess this up. I'll do my best, Sophie promised. David started coming into Sophie's world more too. He showed up at the diner one morning during her shift, sitting at the counter and ordering coffee. Her coworkers were confused by this handsome guy who seemed to know their Sophie so well. "Who's that?" her manager whispered. "And why's he looking at you like that?" "That's David, the guy I've been seeing. He's gorgeous." "What's he do?" Sophie hesitated for just a second. "He works in tech." It wasn't a lie. Not really. She'd tell her coworkers eventually. But for now, she wanted to keep things simple. David also came to another one of her brother's games. This time he brought Catherine along. Sophie watched them cheer and joke around with her family, and something warm settled in her chest. Maybe this could work after all. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One night, David invited Sophie to a charity gala his company was sponsoring. She'd agreed, wanting to see more of his world. But standing in a boutique looking at dresses that cost more than her monthly rent, she felt completely out of her depth. "I can't afford any of these," she whispered to David. No, Sophie was firm. "We talked about this. I need to do things my own way." They left the boutique and went to a regular department store, where Sophie found a simple black dress on sale. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and it was hers. David told her she looked beautiful, and she could tell he meant it. The gala was overwhelming. Everyone there seemed to know David, and Sophie felt their curious stares. She overheard whispers about who she was, where she came from. At one point, a woman in diamonds approached her. "You're David's new girlfriend, aren't you? How refreshing. He usually goes for the Victoria types." "I'm sorry, the Victoria types?" "Oh, you know. Society girls. Old money. Women who know how to navigate this world." The woman's smile was sharp. "I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually." Sophie excused herself and found the bathroom, trying to calm her racing heart. She stared at herself in the mirror, suddenly feeling like she was wearing a costume. What was she doing here? She didn't belong in this world of champagne and diamonds and people who smiled while insulting you. David found her a few minutes later. "Hey, you okay? You disappeared." "I don't think I can do this," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "Everyone's staring at me like I'm some kind of curiosity. Like they're wondering what you're doing with someone like me." "Sophie, I don't care what they think." "But I do. I care that I feel like I'm being judged every second. I care that women are making comments about how I'm not like your usual type. I care that I feel completely out of place at something that's just a normal Tuesday for you." David was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand. "Let's get out of here." "What? You can't just leave your own event." "Watch me." He led her out of the ballroom, past confused staff and surprised guests. They got in his car and he drove them to a late-night diner, similar to the one where Sophie worked. They sat in a booth, both still in their formal wear, and ordered pie and coffee. "I'm sorry," David said. "I shouldn't have thrown you into that without preparing you better. Those events are awful, even for people who are used to them." "I just don't know if I can be that person, David. The one who goes to galas and makes small talk with people who look down on me." "Then don't be. Be yourself. That's all I want." David reached across the table and took her hand. "And anyone who has a problem with that can deal with me." Sophie looked at him, really looked at him, at this man who'd left his own fancy event to sit in a diner with her, who chose her world over his without hesitation. Maybe they could figure this out after all. "Okay," she said, "but next time I'm picking the event, and it's going to involve a lot less champagne and a lot more bowling." David laughed. "Deal." 1 year had passed since that rainy night on the highway, and Sophie stood in front of a small brick building with butterflies in her stomach. Above the door hung a sign that read Sophie's Corner Cafe in elegant lettering. Her dream was finally real. David stood beside her, holding her hand. "Ready to open the doors?" "I think so." "I'm terrified, but yes." The past year had been a journey neither of them could have predicted. After that disastrous gala, they'd figured out a rhythm that worked for both of them. David stepped back from some of his social obligations, focusing more on the parts of his work that actually mattered to him. Sophie slowly got comfortable with certain aspects of his world, while firmly keeping her feet planted in her own. The cafe had been Sophie's project from start to finish. When David had offered to just buy her a building and set everything up, she'd refused. Instead, he'd helped her in a different way. He'd connected her with his financial advisor, who'd helped her create a solid business plan. He'd introduced her to a banker who'd approved her loan application. He'd given her advice when she asked for it but never pushed. "I'm proud of you," David said as they stood looking at the cafe. "You did this yourself, not entirely by myself. You helped. I just opened a few doors. You're the one who walked through them and built something amazing." Sophie squeezed his hand. It had taken her a while to accept that letting people help wasn't the same as being rescued. David had taught her that, just like she taught him that money couldn't buy the things that really mattered. They opened the doors, and people started flowing in. Sophie's family was there, her brother grinning with pride. Her coworkers from the diner showed up, along with her regulars who'd promised to become regulars here too. Catherine arrived with flowers. Even some of David's business associates came, curious about the woman who'd changed their usually serious CEO. The cafe was everything Sophie had dreamed of. Cozy, warm, with mismatched furniture she'd collected from thrift stores and flea markets. The menu featured her grandmother's recipes alongside classic cafe fare. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious, just good food and better coffee. David spent the day helping out behind the counter, which made Sophie laugh. "You're terrible at making coffee," she teased. "I'm getting better," he protested, though the latte he was attempting looked questionable at best. "Stick to the business strategy and leave the coffee to me." Watching him interact with customers, Sophie felt a wave of affection. He'd changed so much in the past year. He still ran his company, still had responsibilities and obligations, but he'd found balance. He'd started a program at his company that gave tech training to kids from low-income neighborhoods, inspired by Sophie's stories about her brother's struggles to afford college. As the opening day wound down and the last customers left, Sophie collapsed into a chair. David sat beside her, both of them exhausted but happy. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Sophie said. "That night you had the flat tire. If I'd just driven past you, none of this would have happened. I'd probably still be stuck on that highway," David joked. "I'm serious, though. One small decision changed everything." "You changed everything," David said softly. "You made me remember who I wanted to be. You showed me what actually matters." Sophie leaned her head on his shoulder. "You changed me too. You helped me believe I deserved to dream bigger, that I didn't have to do everything alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then David shifted, reaching into his pocket. "Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you." Sophie's heart started racing as she watched him pull out a small box. But when he opened it, instead of some massive diamond ring, there was a simple gold band with a small, elegant stone. "This was my grandmother's ring," David said. "She wasn't born into money. She worked as a teacher her whole life. She and my grandfather built their life together from nothing, and they were the happiest couple I've ever known. When I told her about you before she passed away last month, she made me promise to give you this ring if I was serious about you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She'd met David's grandmother twice, and the woman had been warm and kind. Nothing like the stuffy rich people Sophie had feared. "Sophie, I don't want you to marry the guy from the magazine covers. I don't want you to marry the CEO or the billionaire or any of that. I want you to marry me, just me. The guy who can't make coffee and loses at bowling and thinks the best part of his day is when you laugh at his terrible jokes." David's voice was shaking slightly. "Will you marry me?" Sophie looked at the ring, then at David's face. She thought about the journey they'd taken together, the obstacles they'd overcome, the way they'd learned to bridge their different worlds without losing themselves in the process. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." David slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. They kissed there in the empty cafe, surrounded by the dream Sophie had built and the future they would build together. The wedding, 6 months later, was exactly what they both wanted. Not a massive society affair, but something intimate and meaningful. They held it at a small venue in Sophie's neighborhood, with a guest list that mixed David's business world with Sophie's regular world seamlessly. Catherine was Sophie's maid of honor, and Sophie's brother stood up for David too. Sophie wore a dress she'd chosen herself from a local boutique. Simple, elegant, and affordable. David wore a suit, but he'd loosened his tie before the ceremony even started, making Sophie laugh. "Some things never change," she'd whispered to him at the altar. "Good," he'd whispered back. "I like who I am with you." Their vows were honest and real. David promised to never let his work consume him, to always remember what mattered most, and to keep losing at bowling on purpose because he loved her competitive victory dances. Sophie promised to let him help when she needed it, to be patient with his world even when it frustrated her, and to always call him out when he was being ridiculous. At the reception, held in Sophie's cafe, people from all walks of life mingled together. David's business partner chatted with Sophie's former manager from the diner. Catherine laughed with Sophie's brother. Rich and poor, powerful and ordinary, all celebrating together. Sophie's mother pulled her aside at one point, tears in her eyes. Your father would be so proud of you, not because you married someone successful, but because you stayed true to yourself through it all. I learned that from him, Sophie said, hugging her mom. He always said character matters more than circumstances. As the night wound down, Sophie and David snuck away from the party for a moment, stepping outside the cafe into the cool evening air. Can you believe we're married? Sophie said, looking at the ring on her finger. Honestly, sometimes I still can't believe you gave me your number that night on the highway. Best flat tire you ever had? Best flat tire I ever had, David agreed, pulling her close. They'd learned that love wasn't about coming from the same place or having the same amount of money in the bank. It was about seeing each other clearly, supporting each other's dreams, and building something new together. It was about honesty and compromise and choosing each other every single day. Sophie looked up at the sign for her cafe, then at her husband's face, and felt complete. She still worked at the cafe every day, still valued hard work and independence. David still ran his company, but with new priorities and a better understanding of what made life meaningful. They'd created a life that belonged to both of them. Not his world or her world, but their world. A world where a simple act of kindness on a rainy highway had led to something neither of them could have imagined. And sometimes, late at night when they were lying in bed in their house that was neither too modest nor too grand, they'd laugh about how it all started. You know, Sophie would say, you really should learn how to change a tire. Why? David would respond. It worked out pretty well for me not knowing, and Sophie would have to agree. Sometimes the best things in life happened when you stopped for someone in need, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was late and rainy and you were tired. Sometimes helping a stranger on the highway led to finding exactly what you'd been missing all along. Their story wasn't about a poor girl being rescued by a rich man. It was about two people from different worlds who met by chance, fell in love honestly, and built a life together on their own terms. It was about staying true to yourself while opening your heart to someone else. It was about understanding that what you have doesn't define who you are, but what you do with it does. And it all started with a flat tire, a rainy night, and a kind woman who chose to stop and help.